The galaxy had been at war for 6 years. Not a small war. Not a border skirmish between two neighboring systems. This was the kind of war that swallowed entire solar systems whole, the kind that turned stars into graveyards and left moons cracked open like broken eggs floating in the dark. 6 years of blood and fire and screaming ships tore apart in the cold silence of space. The war was between two of the most powerful alien civilizations in the known galaxy. On one side, the Velhari. Tall, pale, six-limbed creatures with skin like polished bone and eyes that glowed faint purple in the dark. They were ancient, calculated, patient. They had been building their empire for over 4,000 years, and they fought like it, slow, methodical, suffocating. Their warships were massive, each one the size of a small city, covered in layered energy shields that could absorb 100 direct hits before even flickering. They did not rush. They did not panic. They simply moved forward, step by step, crushing everything in their path like a glacier destroying a forest. On the other side, the Drachnori. Shorter, darker, with 4 arms and thick armored skin that grew harder as they aged. They were fierce, aggressive, and born into a culture that worshipped war like a religion. Every Drachnori child learned to fight before they learned to read. Their ships were fast, impossibly fast, built for hit-and-run attacks designed to strike and vanish before the enemy could respond. They were not as ancient as the Velhari, but they were angrier. And being angry at war counted for a lot. Between these two civilizations, 6 years of absolute destruction. Hundreds of planets caught in the crossfire had already been evacuated or abandoned. Trade routes that had existed for centuries were now dead zones. Smaller species, the Lorei, the Fenich, and the Quillari, had all retreated deep into neutral space, sealing their borders, praying that the storm passed without swallowing them. And Earth? Earth had done what it always did when something terrifying happened in the neighborhood. Earth had watched. Quietly. Carefully. With its scientists and analysts and military advisors all sitting in rooms full of screens and charts, studying every battle report, every movement, every weapon fired, every ship destroyed, taking notes, learning, calculating. It was the human way. You didn't jump into something you didn't understand. You watched first. You learned the patterns. You found the weaknesses. And then, when the moment was right, you moved. But that moment had not come yet. At least, that's what Earth's Interstellar Council believed on the morning of day 1 of what would later be called the Kelvari Corridor Campaign, the single most strategically important campaign of the entire 6-year war. The Kelvari Corridor was a narrow stretch of space, roughly 40 million kilometers wide, that connected the Velhari's eastern supply chain to their front lines. If the Velhari lost the corridor, their front lines would face a complete cut-off from food, fuel, weapons, and reinforcements. They would collapse within months. Which is exactly why the Drachnori had spent the last 8 months planning a massive coordinated assault to take it. And the Velhari knew it was coming. Both sides had poured everything they had into this one stretch of space. On the Velhari side, 47 warships, including 6 of their massive Titan-class dreadnoughts, each one nearly 3 kilometers long. 14 support vessels. 11 fighter carrier platforms. Total crew count across all ships, approximately 900,000 soldiers. On the Drachnori side, 62 warships including their infamous Wolf-class strike cruisers, fast and deadly. 22 support ships. Total crew, just over 1.2 million warriors. The battle was about to begin. Commanders on both sides had given their final orders. Weapons were charged. Shields were up. Every sensor array in the corridor was screaming with activity. And then, in the middle of all of it, something happened that nobody on either side had planned for. A new signal appeared on every single radar screen in the corridor. Not Velhari. Not Drachnori. Something else. The Velhari flagship sensor officer, a veteran named Solari Vel, stared at his screen for 3 full seconds before he said anything. His 6 fingers moved quickly over his console, running identification checks. Species registry. Vessel classification. Threat assessment. The computer returned a result he had never seen flagged in a real combat situation before. He turned slowly toward his commanding admiral, High Admiral Turix Vale, the oldest and most decorated officer in the Velhari fleet, and said very quietly, "Admiral, the vessel does not match any Velhari or Drachnori classification." Turix Vale did not look up from his console immediately. He was used to sensing ghosts, equipment errors, especially in high-tension situations like these, when every system was running at maximum capacity. "Run it again," he said simply. Solari ran it again. Same result. "Admiral," he said, and this time there was something different in his voice, Something that, in 6 years of war, Turk's Vale had almost never heard from a veteran officer. Uncertainty. The vessel is confirmed real. It is not a ghost. It is not Velhari. It is not Draknori. Species registry match is coming back as. He paused. As what? Turk's Vale said, finally looking up. Solari looked at his admiral with wide, glowing eyes. Human, sir. The vessel is human. For exactly 4 seconds, the entire bridge of the Velhari flagship was completely silent. And then every single alarm on the ship went off at once. Because the computer had not just identified the vessel. It had identified the class of the vessel. And the class designation, pulled from 6 years of quietly collected intelligence reports on human military development, made Turk's Vale's pale fingers go cold. He read the words on his screen slowly. UNSC Heavy Battlecruiser, Class, Iron Sovereign, Designation, UES Abraham Lincoln, Status, Combat Ready. Caro, Turk's Vale whispered to himself, an old Velhari word that roughly translated to, this changes everything. And across the corridor, on the Draknori command ship, their sensor officer was reading the exact same classification. And saying something very similar. Because every species in the galaxy that had been watching humanity quietly for the last 60 years knew one thing above all else. Humans did not send ships to places they did not intend to win. Abraham Lincoln had not arrived quietly at US. That was the first thing both fleets noticed, and the first thing that confused them. Every other species entered a war zone they weren't invited to in stealth mode. Shields minimal. Transponders off. Weapons powered down. You came in small, you came in carefully, you announced yourself through diplomatic channels first and you asked permission. Abraham Lincoln had done none of those things. It had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kelvari corridor at full power, every system blazing, every light on, transponder broadcasting on every open frequency in the entire region at maximum volume. Its identification signal was so strong it was physically rattling secondary systems on ships 20,000 kilometers away. It wasn't hiding. It wanted to be seen. On the bridge of the Abraham Lincoln, Captain Sarah Ironjaw Cole stood with both hands clasped behind her back, looking out through the main viewport at the most terrifying sight any human commander had ever faced in the field. Over 100 alien warships. Spread across 40 million kilometers of space. Weapons hot. Shields up. They were already in the middle of pre-battle positioning maneuvers that had been planned for months. Sarah Cole was 44 years old. She had dark brown skin, short-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and a jaw so square and set that her crew had given her the nickname Iron Jaw 3 years ago, and it had stuck ever since. She had been fighting in space for 22 years, first as a fighter pilot, then as a tactical officer, then as the XO of 2 different battlecruisers before finally getting her own command 4 years ago. She had never fought a war with aliens before. Neither had any human. But she had spent the last 6 years studying this one. Behind her, her bridge crew of 31 men and women sat at their stations. Tense, professional, every single one of them pretending very hard not to be absolutely terrified. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, her helmsman, 28 years old, from Atlanta, Georgia, had both hands locked on the navigation controls and hadn't blinked in 2 minutes. Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair, her tactical officer, 36, from Mumbai, India, was running threat assessment calculations so fast her fingers were practically a blur. Commander Eli Okafor, her XO, 40 years old, tall and quiet, from Lagos, Nigeria, stood 2 steps to her right and was the only other person on the bridge who looked even remotely calm. Captain, Priya said, her eyes glued to the screens, 43 separate weapons locks are targeting us. Velhari and Draknori both. I see them, Sarah said. They haven't fired yet, Eli noted. They won't, Sarah said. Not yet. They're confused. Confused is temporary, Eli replied quietly. What happens when they stop being confused? Sarah allowed herself a small, tight smile. Then we remind them why they should stay that way. She turned to her communications officer, Ensign Tommy Park, 23 years old, from Honolulu, Hawaii, and currently the youngest person on the bridge and also the person whose hands were shaking the most noticeably. Tommy, she said calmly. He straightened up immediately. Yes, Captain? Open a channel. Broadcast on all frequencies. Both fleets. I want every ship in this corridor to hear me. Tommy's hands steadied. He was a competent officer. He pulled it together. Channel open, Captain. You're live across the corridor. Sarah Cole took one slow breath. And then she spoke. Attention all vessels in the Kelvari corridor. This is Captain Sarah Cole of the United Earth ship Abraham Lincoln, representing the United Earth Space Command and the people of Earth. We have entered this corridor under direct authorization of the Earth Interstellar Council. We are not here as observers. We are not here as neutrals. We are here with a formal declaration, effective immediately, that the Kelvari Corridor is designated a protected transit zone under Earth Emergency Provision 7. Any vessel that fires a weapon in this corridor in the next 24 hours will be considered a hostile actor against Earth interests and will be responded to accordingly. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. I recommend everyone take a breath. And nobody does anything stupid. She nodded to Tommy. Close the channel. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Marcus Webb, the helmsman from Atlanta, said very quietly, Captain, with respect, there are 117 ships out there. I know, Marcus. And there's one of us. I know that too. And they have us locked up from 43 different angles. Marcus, Sarah said patiently. Yes, Captain? Have you ever seen what happens when you corner a human? Marcus thought about that for a second. No, ma'am. Sarah turned back to the viewport. Neither have they, she said. HFY MJHY, now we show them. On the Velhari flagship, High Admiral Turix Vale had listened to every word of Sarah Cole's transmission in complete silence. When it ended, he sat back in his command chair slowly and said nothing for a long moment. His senior staff waited. Finally, his communications officer spoke. Admiral, the Draknori are hailing us. Direct channel. High Commander Vrax himself. That was unusual. Turix and Vrax had not spoken directly since the war began. They communicated only through automated ultimatums and battle declarations. Put him through, Turix said. The screen crackled and the face of High Commander Vrax appeared, broad, dark-plated, for red eyes burning with irritation. But also Turix noticed something else. Something he had never seen on a Draknori warrior's face before. Caution. Velhari, Vrax said simply. Draknori, Turix replied. Pause. The human ship, Vrax said. What do you know about it? Turix considered his answer carefully. Enough to know, he said slowly, that firing on it would be the worst decision either of us has ever made. Another long pause. Agreed, Vrax said. And for the first time in 6 years, the two greatest enemies in the galaxy agreed on something. 20 minutes after Sarah Cole's broadcast, the weapons locks were still on. Nobody had fired. Nobody had moved. The entire corridor, 117 warships representing nearly 2 million soldiers, had come to a complete, bewildered standstill. Like two massive tidal waves that had suddenly frozen in place, suspended and trembling, waiting to see what happened next. The Abraham Lincoln sat directly in the middle of it all. On the bridge, Priya Nair was doing what she always did when she was nervous. She was working. Pulling data. Running numbers. Her screens were flooded with analysis on every ship in the corridor. Shield frequencies, weapon types, propulsion signatures and crew size estimates. Captain, she said after about 15 minutes of this work, I want to walk you through what we're actually looking at out there, because I think it's important that everyone on this bridge has the full picture. Sarah nodded. Go ahead. Priya pulled up a holographic display in the center of the bridge, a three-dimensional map of the corridor, every ship represented by a small glowing marker. Blue for Velhari. Red for Draknori. And one single white marker, the Abraham Lincoln, sitting right in the center of everything like a marble dropped into the middle of a chessboard. Total hostile tonnage facing us, Priya began, is approximately 460 billion metric tons of warships. Combined weapons output, if every ship in this corridor fired simultaneously, could crack a medium-sized moon. Combined shield strength across the Velhari fleet alone could absorb sustained fire from our main guns for approximately, she checked her numbers, 3 minutes and 40 seconds before catastrophic failure. Marcus Webb made a quiet, strangled sound from the helm station. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Eli Okafor repeated calmly. That's actually better than I expected for 6 Titan-class dreadnoughts. The Draknori ships are less shielded but significantly faster, Priya continued. Their Wolf-class cruisers can close distance from current positions in under 90 seconds. If they go for a swarm attack. They won't, Sarah said. How are you sure? Asterisk, a swarm attack is effective when you know your enemy. They don't know us. Asterisk, Sarah clasped her hands behind her back. Priya, tell them what we're carrying. Priya paused. She pulled up a different screen. The Abraham Lincoln, she said, shifting her tone, is a Mark IV Iron Sovereign-class heavy battlecruiser. Length, 4.2 kilometers. Crew, 3,241. Weapons payload, She looked at her screen and there was a brief pause. 24 Javelin-class long-range mass drivers. 16 Hellfire plasma torpedo banks. 208-point defense cannons. 44 short-range strike missiles. And, another pause, 4 Archangel-class nuclear-tipped penetrator warheads. The bridge was quiet. Nuclear, Marcus Webb said cautiously. We brought nuclear weapons to an alien war. We brought nuclear weapons everywhere, Eli said simply. We're humans. That's what we do. The Velhari and Draknori, Priya said, do not use nuclear technology in warfare. It was considered too destructive and was mutually banned from both fleets by treaty approximately 200 years ago. And they think we follow that treaty? Marcus asked. We never signed it, Sarah said quietly. Another silence. Tommy Park, the young communications officer, looked up from his station with wide eyes. Captain, are we actually going to use? No, Sarah said firmly. We are not. But they don't know that. And that uncertainty, that not knowing, is the most powerful weapon on this ship right now. More powerful than the Archangels. More powerful than the Javelins. She turned to face her crew fully. Fear of what humans might do has kept us safer than any weapon we've ever built. That's what we carry into this corridor. Not just guns. Not just shields. We carry the memory of what we are capable of, and the question of whether we'll actually do it. She let that sit for a moment. Then Eli stepped forward quietly. The Velhari flagship is hailing us, Captain. The Admiral himself. Sarah straightened her uniform jacket. On screen. The main view screen flickered, and for the first time, Captain Sarah Cole and High Admiral Turix Vale looked at each other face to face. Turix studied the human woman in front of him for a long moment. She was smaller than he had imagined. All humans were. Their ships were large, much larger than he'd expected, but the creatures inside them were so physically small. So soft-looking. No armor plating on their skin. No secondary eyelids. No reinforced bone structure. Just fragile, warm-blooded, pink and brown little creatures standing in front of view screens acting like they owned the galaxy. And yet, there was something in this one's eyes that Turix Vale had only seen before in the oldest, most battle-hardened veterans in his fleet. Something that didn't need armor or claws to communicate itself. This creature had decided something. Long ago. And nothing in this corridor was going to change that decision. Captain Cole, he said in practiced but careful English, Turix had been studying human languages for 3 years, anticipating exactly this kind of moment. You have placed your vessel in an extraordinarily dangerous position. I'm aware, Sarah said pleasantly. This conflict has been ongoing for 6 years. It does not concern your species. With respect, Admiral, when a war burns through a corridor that sits 11 light-years from human colony worlds and threatens to destabilize 3 neutral shipping lanes that Earth depends on for food and medicine, it concerns us a great deal. Turix paused. You came here to protect shipping lanes? I came here, Sarah said quietly, because someone had to. 22 hours into the standoff. The weapon locks were still active on both sides. Nobody had fired. Nobody had retreated. The corridor had become the strangest military standoff in recorded galactic history. Nearly 2 million soldiers on over 100 ships, all frozen in place, all watching one human vessel like it might explode at any second. Inside the Abraham Lincoln, the crew ran in 8-hour shifts, keeping every system at peak readiness around the clock. The mess hall was open 24 hours. Engineers worked in rotating teams. Medics ran precautionary health checks. Everyone did their job because doing your job was the only thing that kept the fear manageable. In the captain's ready room, a small, sparse office just off the bridge, Sarah Cole sat at her desk for the first time in 18 hours. She had a cup of coffee going cold beside her keyboard. She was reading mission files she had already read 20 times. A knock at the door. Come in. Eli Okafor stepped in and closed the door behind him. He was carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. He set one in front of her, replaced the cold one, and sat in the chair across the desk. They'd served together for 6 years. They didn't need to warm up to a conversation. How are you? He asked. Fine. Sarah. She looked up. I'm scared, Eli. There. Happy? Extremely, he said. It would concern me deeply if you weren't. She picked up the coffee. We have 3,000 people on this ship. I know. 3,000 people who trusted me enough to follow me into the middle of 2 alien fleets. They followed Earth Command's orders, same as you. Earth Command gave me the mission parameters. Everything else, she gestured vaguely at the viewport, at the endless dark outside filled with alien ships, was my call. Eli was quiet for a moment. Why the corridor? He asked. Of all the places to make the first contact engagement, why here? Why now? Sarah set down her coffee. Because here is where it matters most. If the Velhari take this corridor, the Draknori front collapses and the Velhari push continues, straight into neutral space, straight toward the outer colonies. If the Draknori take it, the Velhari supply chain fails and the Draknori push north, same result, different direction. Either way the war expands. Either way, our neighborhood gets worse. So we plant ourselves in the middle. We plant ourselves in the middle, she confirmed. And we make ourselves the most inconvenient object in the galaxy to move. And if they decide to move us anyway? Sarah looked at him steadily. Then we make it the most expensive decision they've ever made. And we make sure every species watching this situation understands exactly what it costs to pick a fight with Earth. Eli nodded slowly. He'd known her long enough to understand what she wasn't saying. You don't expect to survive this, do you? He said quietly. Sarah didn't answer right away. I expect, she said finally, to do my job. Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, buttoned his uniform jacket and walked to the door. For what it's worth, he said, hand on the frame, I followed you here on purpose. Not because of orders. He left. Sarah sat alone for a while. Then her calm crackled. Captain, you need to see this. It was Priya's voice. And there was something in it that snapped Sarah back to full alertness immediately. She was on the bridge in 45 seconds. Priya was standing at the tactical display, pointing at something that had not been there an hour ago. A third fleet. Smaller. Faster. They were coming in hot from the south end of the corridor. Sarah stared at the sensor readout. Who are they? Unknown configuration, Priya said, voice tight. The registry match is coming back as Quillari. The bridge went very still. The Quillari were one of the neutral species, ones who had sealed their borders and gone quiet at the start of the war. They had no real military. Their ships were light, lightly armed, and designed for trade and transport. What are they doing here? Marcus asked. Priya hesitated. Captain, they're broadcasting on an emergency frequency. It's a distress call. She looked up. There are 12 Quillari colony ships. Civilian ships. 14,000 civilians. They were trying to evacuate through the corridor before the battle started. They didn't make it out in time. They've been hiding in a debris field on the southern edge for the last 22 hours. She paused. They're almost out of life support. The entire bridge turned and looked at Sarah Cole. Sarah stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Plot me a course to the debris field. Captain, Priya started. If we move, we break the standoff, Eli said quietly. One side or both might read it as. I know what it might read as, Sarah said. Plot the course, Marcus. Course plotted, Captain. Engines ahead, 1/4. Take us to those civilians. And Abraham Lincoln moved. For the first time since it arrived, it moved, and 117 alien warships watched a single human vessel break formation to go help 14,000 people it had never met and had no obligation to save. Caro, said Solari Vel aboard the Velhari flagship very quietly. He wasn't the only one. The Abraham Lincoln crossed 23,000 kilometers in 11 minutes. Every sensor array on every ship in the corridor tracked it the entire way. Not a single weapon fired. Not a single ship moved to intercept. It was as if the entire galaxy had collectively decided to pause and watch what happened next. The debris field on the southern edge of the corridor was a graveyard, the shattered remains of what had once been a Velhari mining installation, destroyed in the first year of the war. Massive chunks of twisted metal, silica clouds, and fragments of reactor housing drifting in slow frozen spirals. Sensors had difficulty penetrating it cleanly. Which was exactly why the Quillari ships had been able to hide there undetected for 22 hours. As Abraham Lincoln slowed his navigational speed and entered the outer edge of the field, Sarah leaned forward in her command chair. Tommy, open a channel to the Quillari ships. Channel open, Captain. Quillari vessels, this is Captain Cole of the UES Abraham Lincoln. We have your position. We are coming to you. Do not attempt to move your ships. We will guide you out. A few seconds of static. Then a voice came through, high-pitched, trembling, speaking accented but understandable English, because the Quillari, like most spacefaring species, had learned human languages as a second tongue about 30 years ago, when it became clear that humans were going to be in the galaxy whether anyone invited them or not. The voice belonged to Elder Sova, a Quillari civilian ship commander, 63 years old, responsible for roughly 1,200 men, women, and children aboard her vessel alone. Human ship, you came. The way she said it, 3 words barely above a whisper, hit the bridge of the Abraham Lincoln like a physical thing. Tommy Park looked at his console very hard and said nothing. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. Priya blinked more than usual. We came, Sarah said simply. Tell me your status. Asterisk, life support on 4 of our 12 ships is below 8%. We have children aboard. Elderly. Injured from micro-impacts over the last 22 hours. Asterisk, a pause. We watched the standoff on our sensors. We did not think anyone would leave the standoff to come for us. We did, Sarah said. Now let's get you out. What's your maximum safe speed? 0.0 for lights with our most damaged ships. Sarah looked at Priya. Priya was already calculating. At that speed, Priya said quietly, an exit vector through the northern edge of the corridor takes us directly between the Velhari and Draknori forward positions. Estimated time in the crossfire zone, 14 minutes. And if we go south? The southern exit is clear, but it adds 3 hours to the route. 4 of the damaged ships won't have life support for 3 hours. Sarah nodded once. North it is. Tommy, broadcast to both fleets. Tell them we are escorting civilian vessels through the northern exit lane. Tell them any ship that moves into our path will be considered a direct act of aggression against Earth. Yes, Captain. The message went out. On the Velhari flagship, Turek's Vale received the message. He read it twice. Then he turned to his weapons officer. Pull all targeting locks off the human ship. His weapons officer blinked. Admiral, if we lower our locks, the Draknori may interpret it as. Pull the locks, Turek said, quietly but with a finality that allowed no further discussion. And open a channel to High Commander Vrax. On the Draknori command ship, Vrax had already received the human's broadcast. He was standing at his own viewport, watching the Abraham Lincoln on his long-range visual feed as it began guiding 12 slow, battered civilian ships through the debris field. His second-in-command, Subcommander Keth, stood beside him. They're going to bring the civilians through the northern lane, Keth said. If we let them, it sets a precedent. We allow a human ship to operate freely in this corridor. It complicates our positioning. Yes, Vrax said. High Commander, if we were to use this moment, when their attention is divided, when they're focused on the civilians. Vrax turned and looked at Keth with an expression that stopped him cold. Say that again, Vrax said very quietly. Keth said nothing. We will not fire on a ship that is rescuing civilians, Vrax said. Not because of humans. This is a fundamental aspect of our identity. We are warriors, not butchers. He turned back to the viewport. Pull our targeting locks. Let them pass. The message came from both fleets at approximately the same time, forwarded to the Abraham Lincoln's communication station within seconds of each other. Tommy Park read them both. His voice was a little unsteady when he reported. Captain, both fleets have pulled their targeting locks. Fully clear. No weapons are hot anywhere in the corridor. Sarah closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Thank you, she said, not to her crew, not to the fleets, just quietly to herself or perhaps to something larger. Then she opened her eyes. Marcus, bring us through. Nice and easy. The Abraham Lincoln moved through the northern lane at 0.04 light, a crawl by any combat standard, flanked on both sides by 12 battered Quillari colony ships, their hulls scorched and cracked, their running lights flickering. Between the 2 frozen lines of warships, Velhari to the left, Draknori to the right, the human battlecruiser and its convoy of civilians passed in silence. No one was fired. On both sides, officers and crew members who had spent 6 years shooting at everything that moved stood at their stations and watched. On the Velhari flagship, a young sensor officer named Lari Vel, Solari's daughter serving her first tour, watched the convoy pass on her screen and felt something shift inside her that she had no name for yet. On a Draknori strike cruiser, a veteran gunner named Rock stood with his hand on a trigger he had been trained to pull without hesitation, and he did not pull it. And for the first time in 6 years of war he thought about the word enough. The convoy cleared the northern lane in 14 minutes. 14,000 civilians, breathing, alive, safe. HFY HFY, said Elder Sova over the open channel, using the human phrase she had heard in the broadcast, not entirely sure what it meant, but somehow understanding that it was right for this moment. Sarah Cole heard her say it and smiled, the first real, full smile anyone on the bridge had seen from their captain since they'd arrived in the corridor. With the Quillari civilians clear of the corridor and en route to the nearest neutral station, Sarah Cole brought the Abraham Lincoln back to its original position, dead center of the standoff. The weapon locks came back. Of course they did. A moment of grace was not the same as a peace treaty. Two fleets did not simply go home after a human ship escorted some civilians to safety, despite building toward the most important battle of a 6-year war. The corridor still needed to be won. Supply chains still needed to be protected. 6 years of sacrifices and strategy still hung in the balance. But something had changed. Sarah felt it. Priya felt it. Even Marcus Webb, who had been quietly terrified since they arrived, felt it, though he couldn't have said exactly what it was. The tension in the corridor was the same. The weapons were the same. The numbers were the same. But the way both fleets were looking at the Abraham Lincoln was different. Before, it had been the look you give something dangerous and unpredictable that has inserted itself into your plans and needs to be dealt with. Now, it was something harder to define. It was something that existed in the space between respect and confusion, and it was a question that neither fleet quite knew how to ask. Turrek's Vale asked it. 2 hours after the convoy cleared, his hail came through again. Sarah answered it immediately. Tureks looked older than he had in their first conversation, not physically but in his eyes. Like the last 2 hours had given him something heavy to carry that he hadn't been carrying before. "Captain Cole," he said. "May I ask you something directly?" "You may," Sarah said. "You risked your ship, and 3,000 of your own people, to save 14,000 civilians who had no political value to you, no strategic value, and no military significance. The Qullari are neutral. They owe Earth nothing. They cannot help you. Saving them cost you your positional advantage in this standoff and gave both fleets a window to act against you that you chose to ignore." He paused. "Why?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Because they needed help," she said. Tureks processed this. "Is that the complete answer?" "That's the complete answer." Another pause. Longer this time. "My analysts," Turek said carefully, "have been studying human behavior for 11 years. They have models. Projections. Theories about how your species makes decisions in crisis situations. None of their models predicted this response. What did their models predict? That you would maintain position. That you would calculate the risk to your vessel and crew against the value of the civilians and determine that 14,000 neutral lives were insufficient justification for exposing your ship." "Their model was wrong," Sarah said. "Evidently. Because their model," Sarah said, "was built on the assumption that we calculate the value of lives," she added. "We don't. A life is a life. 14,000 of them, there's no calculation that tells us to leave them there." Tureks was quiet for a very long time. "In 4,000 years of Velhari history," he said finally, "we have fought 237 wars. We have developed extensive doctrine for every conceivable military situation." He paused. "We have no doctrine for this." "For what?" "For an enemy, or an ally, or he searched for the word for a species that operates outside the logic we understand." "We're not outside logic," Sarah said. "Our logic is just different from yours. You ask, what is this worth? We ask, what is the right thing to do? They're not always the same question." Tureks looked at her for a long moment. "Captain Cole," he said quietly, "I have been a soldier for 60 years. I have never said this to an enemy." Pause. "I am not certain you are an enemy." "I'm not," Sarah said simply. "I never was." The channel closed. On the bridge, nobody said anything for a while. Then Eli stepped up beside Sarah. "He's going to talk to Vrax," he said quietly. "I know," Sarah said. "You planned this." Sarah said nothing. "The convoy, the civilian rescue, you knew how both sides would read it." "I hoped," she said carefully. "There's a difference." Eli looked at her sideways. "How long have you been working toward this moment?" "Since we left Earth," she said. 18 days ago." "Caro," Eli said softly, using the Velhari word he'd picked up from the intercepted communications they'd been monitoring. He said it with a small smile. "You planned the whole thing." "Not the whole thing," Sarah said. "You can't plan everything. But you can understand people, any species, well enough to know that if you show them something real, something true, they'll respond to it." She looked out at the corridor, at the 117 ships hanging in the dark. "Every species in this galaxy," she said quietly, "started somewhere small. Started scared. Started with nothing but the decision to survive. The Velhari. The Draknori. The Qullari. All of them. And somewhere inside all of that history, underneath 4,000 years of empire or 600 years of warrior culture, There's still that first small creature that just wanted its children to be safe. She paused. You speak to that. You always speak to that. The communication between Turik's Vale and High Commander Vrax lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Sarah knew this because her signals intelligence team had been monitoring every encrypted channel in the corridor since they arrived, not breaking the encryption but tracking duration, frequency, and emotional stress indicators in the carrier waves. It was a technique Earth's intelligence division had developed specifically for reading alien communication patterns without violating content privacy. 4 hours and 17 minutes was a very long conversation between two people who had been trying to kill each other for 6 years. When it ended, both flagships went unusually quiet. Sarah used the time to walk the ship. She did this exercise whenever she needed to think. Not pacing, walking. Moving through the corridors of the Abraham Lincoln, checking in at different stations, nodding to crew members and stopping to ask questions or listen to concerns. 3,000 people. She couldn't know all of them. But she could know enough of them that the rest of the crew felt it. Felt that their captain was present, real, and paying attention. She stopped in the main engineering bay first. Chief Engineer Rosa Delgado, 50 years old, from San Antonio, Texas, with grease on her forearms and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, was supervising a maintenance rotation on the port side shield generators. How are we looking, Rosa? All systems green, Captain. Shield generators are at 104% efficiency. I pushed them a little higher than spec because I figured we might need the extra margin. Good thinking. Captain, Rosa hesitated. Say it. Asterisk, the engineers have been talking. Not panicking, just talking. Trying to understand what we're doing here. What the goal is. She wiped her hands on a cloth. Most of us signed up for Earth defense. Patrol duty. Maybe a skirmish at a border station. Not, asterisk, she gestured vaguely at the ceiling, meaning the corridor, meaning everything above them, this. Are they holding? Yes, ma'am. Every single one of them. But they want to understand. Sarah nodded. Asterisk, tell them this. Tell everyone that what we're doing here is exactly what we signed up for. Earth defense doesn't just mean a wall around our own solar system. It means making sure the galaxy around us doesn't catch fire and burn in our direction. It means being the thing that stands in the space between the fight and the innocent. Asterisk, she paused. Tell them I know what I asked them to do. And I know the cost. And I don't take it lightly for a single second. Rosa looked at her. That's what they needed to hear, Captain. Thank you. Sarah moved on. She stopped in the medical bay next. Dr. James Ewan, the ship's chief medical officer, 48, from Vancouver, Canada, was running a quiet shift. No casualties yet. Nothing to treat. Which meant his staff was doing the hard work of medical crews in standoff situations. Waiting. Preparing. Trying not to think too deeply about what they might be preparing for. Jim, Sarah said, leaning in the doorway. Dr. Ewan looked up from the medical database he was reviewing. Captain. How are you? And I'm asking professionally. I'm fine. Your blood pressure was elevated on your last check 3 days ago. I was in the middle of plotting a course into the most dangerous standoff in galactic history. My blood pressure was allowed to be elevated. Fair point. It's probably worse now. Probably. She looked around the bay, clean, bright, quiet. What are you reading? Quillari physiology, he said. In case any of the civilians from the convoy needed treatment, I wanted to be prepared. They didn't, fortunately, but, he shrugged, better to know. Sarah smiled. That's very you, Jim. I also, he said carefully, setting down his tablet, have been reading the historical medical records from the 2 previous human-alien military incidents. The Lorraine border dispute 14 years ago. The Fenich encounter 9 years ago. Specifically the psychological aftermath for the crews involved. Sarah waited. Asterisk, crews that were placed in extreme threat situations for extended periods, particularly situations involving moral complexity, high stakes, and uncertain outcomes, showed significant psychological impact afterward. Asterisk, he looked at her. I want to make sure we have support structures in place. For after. You're assuming there's an after, Sarah said lightly. I'm an optimist, Jim said. Occupational requirement. She laughed, a real short laugh. Set it up, Jim. Everything you need. She left the medical bay and continued through the ship. Through the crew quarters. Through the secondary command center. Through the fighter bay, where 44 single-pilot human strike craft sat locked in their cradles, ready but grounded. The pilots were in the adjacent ready room, playing cards mostly. Trying to be normal. One of them, Lieutenant Kayla Osei, 26, from Accra, Ghana, the youngest fighter pilot on the ship, looked up when Sarah stepped in. "Captain on deck," someone called. Everyone started to stand. "At ease, sit down," Sarah said immediately. "I'm just walking." She looked around the room. 22 young faces. The youngest was 23. The oldest was 31. "You okay?" she asked generally. A beat of silence. Then Kayla said carefully, "Captain, are we going to have to fight our way out of this?" The room got very still. Sarah looked at Kayla. She surveyed the entire room. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I hope not. I've been working very hard to make sure it doesn't. But I don't know." Another silence. "If we do," said a pilot named Sergeant Drew Nakamura from Seattle, "we're ready." Others around the room nodded. Not bravado, something quieter. More serious. "I know you are," Sarah said. HFY, I'll give you the signal if and when we need you. Until then, keep playing cards. Try to sleep. Eat something hot." She left the fighter bay and walked back toward the bridge. In the corridor, alone for a moment, she stopped and put one hand flat against the wall of her ship. The metal was faintly warm from the engines running continuously beneath her feet. She could feel the faint vibration of 3,000 people going about their duties, breathing, working, trusting her. "Come on," she said quietly to the ship, to herself, and to the situation. "Give me something to work with." Her comm chirped. "Captain, the Velhari flagship is hailing again. But this time it's not just Turik's Vale. High Commander Vrax is also on the line. They're requesting a joint channel, both of them together, to speak with you simultaneously." Sarah's hand lifted off the wall. She walked back to the bridge. Both faces appeared on the main view screen at the same time. Turik's Vale on the left, pale, six-limbed, those faint purple glowing eyes studying her with the careful attention of someone who had learned to be patient over 60 years of military life. High Commander Vrax on the right, broad, dark, with 4 red eyes, bright and direct. A warrior who communicated everything with the front of his face rather than hiding it. Together, they were the 2 most powerful military commanders in the known galaxy. And they were both looking at Sarah Cole like she had done something they couldn't quite explain and were trying to figure out how to respond to it. "Captain Cole," said Turix. "High Commander Admiral," Sarah said evenly. "This is unusual." "Yes," Vrax said. His voice was deeper than Terix's, a low, resonant sound that came from somewhere in the chest. "We do not disagree on many things. Presently we disagree on almost nothing." "About me?" Sarah asked. "About the situation," Turix said carefully. "Which you created. Tell me." Turix and Vrax exchanged a look. The kind of look 2 old enemies share when they have reluctantly found themselves on the same side of an argument. "We have been at war for 6 years, Turix said. "This campaign, the Kelvari Corridor, was designed to be decisive. One side takes the corridor, the other collapses within 2 years. There is no third outcome." "There wasn't," Vrax said. The correction was quiet but deliberate. Turix acknowledged it with a slight nod. "There wasn't. But your arrival has introduced variables that neither of our strategic models accounted for. The civilian rescue," Vrax continued. 1,000 Quillari. You moved a warship, in an active standoff, without hesitation, to save lives that had no bearing on your mission. You did it with no expectation of reward. No diplomatic maneuvering. No positioning." He paused. "Both of our cultures have stories, old stories from before the wars, about what we call the third path. This option appears only when 2 forces have fought for so long that neither can see anything except the fight." "And you think I'm the third path?" Sarah asked. "We think," Turix said carefully, "that you might be willing to help us find it." Sarah said nothing. She waited. "We want to propose a temporary ceasefire," Vrax said. 24 hours. "In that time, with your facilitation, our senior commanders will meet for direct talks." The bridge under Abraham Lincoln went absolutely silent. Sarah kept her face neutral. But internally, something enormous moved. 6 years, she said. "Why now?" Vrax answered. "Because 6 years ago, neither side believed the other was capable of anything except war. We had no evidence otherwise." Pause. "Today, we watched something we were not capable of explaining through the framework of war. And it reminded both of us that frameworks can be wrong." "You rescued our enemy civilians," Turix said quietly. "The Quillari have trade agreements with the Draknori. They are, technically, an affiliated neutral, closer to Draknori territory. When you risked your ship to save them, you were, in effect, taking a risk for our enemy's allies." Astraski paused. Not once did you ask which side they were closer to. You simply went. It didn't matter which side they were closer to, Sarah said. No, Turek said. It didn't. And that single fact, is what High Commander Vrax and I spoke about for 4 hours. Sarah leaned forward slightly. If I facilitate these talks, what guarantees do both of you give me that the ceasefire holds? My word, Vrax said immediately. Before my fleet and my gods. My formal declaration, Turek said, recorded and transmitted to the Velhari High Council. And if talks fail? The two commanders exchanged another look. Then we return to our positions, Turek said. And the battle proceeds. And my ship. You will be given a clear exit vector before hostilities resume, Vrax said. You have my word on that too. Sarah sat back. She looked at both of them for a long moment. One condition, she said. Name it, Turek said. The talks happen on my ship. Pause. On your ship, Vrax repeated. Neutral ground. Human ground. The Abraham Lincoln. Sarah kept her voice even. If you're serious about a third path, you come to us. Both of you. On foot. Not by comm screen. Another long look between the two commanders. Agreed, said Turek's Vale. Agreed, said Vrax. The channel closed. Priya was already pulling up security protocols. Eli was in the internal communications organizing a reception detail. Tommy was coordinating logistics. The bridge went from still to busy in about 4 seconds. Marcus Webb looked up from his helm station. Captain, did we just? Yes, Sarah said. In 24 hours, the two most powerful alien commanders in the galaxy are going to physically board this ship for peace talks. Yes. And you negotiated that in about 3 minutes. 2 minutes 45 approximately. Marcus turned back to his console. After a moment, Iron Jaw. Marcus. You are absolutely terrifying. Thank you, Lieutenant, Sarah said. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week. The preparation took 18 hours. 18 hours of turning a warship into something that could host the most consequential diplomatic meeting in the history of human-alien relations. It was not a small task. The Abraham Lincoln had a conference suite. Every ship of its class did, built in specifically for situations like this, though nobody had seriously expected a situation quite like this. The suite was designed to accommodate up to 30 beings of varying sizes and biologies. Air composition could be adjusted per zone. Temperature could be modulated in 4 independent sections. The table was a flat oval of brushed titanium, wide enough that 12 people of varying species dimensions could sit at it with room to move. Rosa Delgado's engineering team spent 8 hours checking and double-checking the life support adjustments for the Velhari and Draknori delegations. Velhari breathed a nitrogen-heavier atmosphere and preferred cooler temperatures. Draknori needed slightly elevated oxygen and warmer ambient heat. Dr. Ewan cross-referenced every possible medical interaction. If either delegation experiences any kind of atmospheric sensitivity reaction on my ship, he told Sarah privately, I will never forgive myself. You've triple-checked everything, Jim? I'm going to quadruple-check. Jim. 4,000 years of Velhari civilization, Captain. If I give one of their delegates a headache, I will personally consider it an interstellar incident. Sarah's security detail, led by Master Sergeant Lena Richter from Berlin, a former ground combat specialist built like a very fit oak tree, coordinated the entry protocols with both fleets. The delegations would come by shuttle. No more than 8 members per side. Personal weapons are to be stowed in their shuttles before boarding. No exceptions. What if they refuse the no weapons condition? Lena asked. Then we have a new conversation about whether they're serious, Sarah said. Both sides agreed to the condition without negotiation. At 1400 hours, exactly 21 hours after the initial ceasefire agreement, 2 shuttles entered the Abraham Lincoln's main docking bay simultaneously. The Velhari shuttle was sleek, geometric, and all angles, like a building that someone had decided should fly. The Draknori shuttle was the opposite, organic-looking and curved, with the hull rippling with layered armor plate that looked almost biological. They landed side by side in the bay. The docking bay doors sealed. Atmosphere equalized. Then the ramp to the conference level opened. Sarah Cole stood at the entrance to the conference suite in her formal service uniform, deep navy blue, gold trim, and 3 rows of service medals on her left chest. Eli Okafor stood 2 steps behind her. Lena Richter and her detail were posted at every entry point at attention, still as statues. The Velhari delegation came first. 8 of them, Turik's Vale at the front, his senior officers behind him. Up close in person the scale of a Velhari was striking. They were tall, nearly 2.5 meters, with that pale, almost luminous skin and the subtle glow of their eyes. They moved with a kind of unhurried precision that spoke of age and control. Turik's Vale stopped in front of Sarah. He was more than a foot taller than her. He looked down at her, not with condescension, but with the frank, direct attention of someone assessing something new. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out one of his 6 long hands, slowly, carefully watching her face, and held it palm upward, in a Velhari gesture that Sarah's cultural briefing notes had described as a formal acknowledgement of equal standing. A gesture typically only exchanged between commanders of equal rank. He had never, in 60 years of military life, made this gesture to a non-Velhari. Sarah reached up and placed her hand palm down over his. The correct response. Something moved in Terex's eyes. "Captain Cole," he said. "Admiral Vale. Welcome aboard the Abraham Lincoln." The Draknori delegation arrived 30 seconds later. Vrax was shorter than Turix but wider, built like a compressed mountain, that four-eyed face calm and direct. He walked with the rolling, slightly forward-leaning gait of someone who had spent their whole life prepared to fight and had learned to carry that readiness quietly. He stopped in front of Sarah. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that was quieter than his usual broadcast tone, "My grandmother's mother was on Quillari Station during the first border wars. She was evacuated by a Quillari civilian ship. She survived because of that." He paused. "I did not know I remembered that story until yesterday." Sarah said nothing. She just nodded. "You reminded me," Vrax said. "That is a debt." "No debt," Sarah said. "Just people helping people." Vrax looked at her for another moment. Then he extended one of his 4 hands, fist closed, a Draknori gesture of respect between warriors. Sarah made a fist and met it. She'd read the briefing notes too. The corner of Vrax's mouth moved. The closest thing to a smile a Draknori combat veteran was going to show in a formal setting. "Shall we?" Sarah said, gesturing toward the conference room. They went in. The talks lasted 11 hours. Sarah did not run them. She had been clear about that from the beginning. Her role was facilitator, not negotiator. She had no stake in the territorial outcomes. She had no opinion on supply routes or resource claims or border zones. She was there to keep the conversation from collapsing. To ask the right question when silence became dangerous. To remind both sides when they pushed to the edge why they were sitting at this table at all. It was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Harder than the standoff. Harder than the rescue. Harder than sailing into a war zone with 100 ships aiming at her. Because in the standoff and the rescue she had known what to do. Her instincts, her training, and her values, they all aligned and pointed in one direction and she followed them. In the conference room, she had to hold space for people who had been killing each other for 6 years to find their way back to something neither of them was sure they believed in anymore. There were moments when it nearly broke. 3 hours in, a Velhari senior officer, Commander Sellis Vale, Terex's second son, spread a series of tactical maps on the table showing Draknori weapon strikes on civilian Velhari science stations in the second year of the war. 17 stations. 32,000 scientists. All dead. The Draknori delegation went silent and hard-faced. "We did not target civilians," Vrax said low and flat. "The stations were marked civilian. They were marked civilian. They were used as intelligence relay posts for Velhari fleet movements. We had confirmed intelligence." 32,000 scientists. Who were living inside a military communications network? The temperature in the room went up several degrees. Sarah let it go for 30 seconds. Enough time for both sides to fully feel the heat. It's long enough to be real. Not so long before it became irreversible. Then she put both hands flat on the table. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just there. Both sides looked at her. "You're both right," she said quietly. "And you're both wrong. And 32,000 people are still dead, and that's the thing that's actually true." She looked at Sellis Vale. "You lost people you cannot get back." Then at Vrax. "You made a decision in war that you cannot unmake." Pause. Neither of those facts changes. But here's what can change, whether 32,000 more people die in the next campaign. And the campaign after that. And the one after that. Silence. "That's why you're sitting here," she said. "Not to agree that the past was fair. It wasn't. Not to pretend the wounds don't exist. They do. You're sitting here because at some point the cost of continuing becomes larger than the cost of stopping." She looked at Turix. Have you reached that point, Admiral? Turk's Vale looked at the maps for a long time. We reached that point, he said quietly, somewhere around year 4. Sarah looked at Vrax. Vrax looked at his hands, all 4 of them on the table. He had fought since he was 17 years old. He was 59 now. He had never in his adult life known a time when his people were not at war. We reached it in year 3, he said. And kept fighting anyway. Why? Sarah asked. Because stopping felt like losing, Vrax said. And we did not know how to lose. And now? Asterisk. A very long silence. Now, Vrax said slowly, I think I understand the difference between losing a war and ending one. The room was quiet for a long time after that. The talks continued. By hour 7 they had a framework, not a peace treaty, not yet, but a structured ceasefire agreement with defined terms. A neutral zone through the Kelvari corridor, jointly monitored, open to civilian traffic. A 60-day pause in all offensive operations. A commitment to formal negotiations to begin within 30 days, hosted on neutral ground with human facilitation. By hour 9, both sides had flagged 3 areas of deep concern that would need extended negotiation: territorial boundaries in the eastern sectors, resource rights in the outer Vale, and reparations frameworks for civilian losses on both sides. By hour 11, both commanders had signed their own hands in their own languages on a document that Sarah's communications team immediately transmitted to Earth, to the Velhari High Council, to the Draknori War Command, and to every neutral species in the galaxy. When Turk's Vale's pen left the paper, if you could call it a pen and if you could call it paper, he set it down and looked at the signatures for a moment. Then he looked at Sarah. I have one question, he said. A personal one. Go ahead. When you brought your ship here, when Earth Command sent you, did they believe this was possible? A ceasefire? Talks. Sarah considered her answer. Earth Command, she said carefully, authorized me to enter the corridor and establish Earth's presence as a protective factor for civilian transit lanes. The diplomatic outcome, asterisk, she paused, was my initiative. Turix was quiet for a moment. Your superiors did not order this? Not specifically. Then you did this on your own authority. On my authority and on 3,000 people's trust, she said. And on the belief that most species, usually, would rather find the third path if someone bothered to show them where it was. Turk's Vale looked at her for a long time. Caro, he said softly. He said it the same way he had when Abraham Lincoln first appeared on his sensors. The discovery changes everything. But this time he was smiling. The Velhari and Draknori delegations left the Abraham Lincoln at 0300 hours ship time. Both shuttles departed, side by side, back to their respective flagships. Both fleets began the slow process of standing down from combat readiness, lowering weapons locks, pulling back forward positions, and creating space in the corridor as the ceasefire took effect. On the bridge of the Abraham Lincoln, the night shift crew was running quietly. Most of the senior staff had finally gone to get a few hours of rest. Sarah was alone at the viewport, or as close to alone as a captain ever gets on a functioning warship. She was very exhausted. Not physically, though she hadn't slept properly in nearly 60 hours. Something deeper than physical. The weight that she had been carrying since they left Earth, the weight of 3,000 lives and a plan that might not work in a war that nobody had asked her to end but that she had decided to walk into anyway, that weight had not lifted. It had shifted. Changed shape. Become something different. It was still heavy. But now it was the kind of heavy that meant something. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around. Eli. You should sleep, he said, coming to stand beside her. I know. You haven't slept in? I know, Eli. They stood together looking out at the corridor. Both fleets are beginning their slow withdrawal. Massive ships moving with the kind of deliberate, careful motion you use when you're trying to demonstrate that your intentions have changed. Earth Command hailed while you were in the conference room, Eli said. I know. I saw the flag on my comm. Admiral Nakamura himself. He wants a full debrief. Of course he does. He used the word, unauthorized, 3 times in a 40-second message. That's efficient. Eli smiled slightly. Sarah also talking about a commendation. Possibly the highest interstellar service decoration in Earth's history. Tell them I don't need a commendation. They don't listen to me. Tell them I said it. Pause. 3,000 people, Eli said quietly. You keep thinking about them. I think about the ones it almost cost, Sarah said. 7 hours into the talks, when Celise Vale and Vrax almost came apart over the science stations, I felt how close it was. How it could have gone. If one person had moved too fast, said the wrong thing, pulled back from the table? They didn't. They almost did. Almost is not the same as did. She turned and looked at him. 14 people didn't come back from the Lorraine incident. 14 people. And that was a border dispute over a communication relay station. We were sitting in a room trying to end a 6-year war between the two largest military powers in this galaxy. The margin was as thin as you needed it to be, Eli said firmly. And it held. Because you held it. Sarah looked back out the viewport. After a while she said, I keep thinking about Kayla. In the fighter bay. 26 years old. She asked me if we were going to have to fight our way out. And I told her I didn't know. That was honest. She should never have been here. None of them should have. Sarah. Eli turned to face her fully. Listen to me. Every person on this ship is a trained professional who made a choice to serve. They're not victims of your decision. They're participants in it. And what just happened, what they were part of, they will carry that for the rest of their lives. Not as a wound. As something else. Sarah was quiet. Ask Kayla tomorrow, he said. Ask any of them. Ask Marcus, who was terrified from minute one and held that helm for 60 hours without a complaint. Ask Tommy Park, who broadcast to 100 alien warships and kept his voice steady. Ask Rosa Delgado, who pushed the shields to 104% efficiency just in case. They were magnificent, Sarah said quietly. They were. And they were because of you. HFY HFY. That's what you said before we moved to help the civilians. After this, now you know they were already ready. Something in her face softened. She breathed. Go to bed, Sarah, Eli said gently. In a minute. He left her alone. She stood at the viewport for a little while longer. Watching the lights of 100 ships moving slowly, carefully away from each other, not in defeat, not in victory, but in the strange, tentative first steps of something that might, if it held, if it was tended diligently, if enough people on both sides were willing to keep choosing it, might become peace. She thought about what Turix Vale had said at the very end of the talks, as the delegations were filing out. He had paused at the door and turned back and said in a low voice meant only for her. My people have a word. It translates, roughly, as the moment before the end of a long winter. The exact moment when you cannot yet see the spring, something in the cold has changed and you know it is coming. We use it only once or twice in a lifetime. He had looked at her steadily. That moment is that moment, he had said. Then he had left. Sarah Cole put her hand flat against the cool viewport glass, the same way she had put it against the wall of the corridor hours ago, feeling the warmth and vibration of the ship, the life of it, and the 3,000 souls moving through it. Outside the glass, the corridor. The slowly parting fleets. The stars. Come on, she said, the same word she had said to herself in the corridor, the same quiet prayer to something larger. Hold. 3 months later. The formal peace negotiations began on a neutral station. Midpoint Station, a sprawling civilian hub in unclaimed space, equidistant between Velhari and Draknori territory. Earth sent 3 diplomatic teams. The Velhari sent 12 senior officials. The Draknori sent 9. 3 other species, the Quillari, the Lorei, and the Fenich, sent observers. The talks were expected to last years. These things always did. But they had started. That was the thing. They had started. The UES Abraham Lincoln returned to Earth on a Tuesday morning, ship time, docking at the UNSC main orbital station above the Pacific Ocean. As it came into visual range of Earth, Tommy Park, still at his communication station as he had been for most of the journey home, quietly opened the ship-wide intercom. He didn't ask permission. He just did it. And then he didn't say anything. He just left the channel open. And after a few seconds, because the crew knew what they were approaching, because they could feel it in the change in the engines, the shift in the navigation system, and the particular quality of the light on their screens, the sound started coming through. From everywhere on the ship. Not organized. Not rehearsed. Just people, 3,000 people, quietly reacting to the sight of home through whatever viewport or porthole or screen was nearest to them. A laugh in the engine room. Someone saying, "There she is," in a voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere in the crew quarters, someone crying quietly, the sound of relief so complete it had nowhere else to go. On the bridge, Marcus Webb looked at the blue curve of Earth filling his viewport and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "We made it." "We made it," Sarah confirmed. She was standing as she usually did behind the helm. Not sitting. Standing. Present. The docking procedure took 40 minutes. During that time, a message came through from Earth Command, from Admiral Nakamura directly, informing Captain Cole that upon docking she was to report for a debrief that was expected to last several days. The word unauthorized appeared again, but this time it was followed immediately by the word historic, and then the words Medal of Earth, the highest honor in the interstellar service. Sarah read the message, forwarded it to Eli without comment, and went back to watching the docking procedure. When the locks engaged and the ship went still, truly still for the first time in 3 weeks, the bridge crew began their shutdown protocols. Systems are being set to standby. Logs being closed. The quiet, methodical work of a crew completing a mission. Eli came to stand beside her. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," she said honestly. "I kept waiting for something else to happen. Something else. Another problem. Another ship appears on the sensors. Another reason to keep moving." "There's no more moving for a while," he said. "Just debriefs. And probably a ceremony. And then another mission eventually." "Another mission," she repeated. "There are a lot of galaxies out there," Eli said. "And not many ships are willing to drive into the middle of it." Sarah smiled. She looked around the bridge, at Marcus carefully completing his helm log. At Priya backing up her tactical data. At Tommy Park, he closed his communications board with the careful attention of someone who understood that the equipment he was touching had been part of something that mattered. Every face was professional, quiet, and contained, and underneath the professionalism, something bright and solid that hadn't been there before they left. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "Tell me." "I think every species in this galaxy has been watching us since we showed up in their neighborhood. Trying to figure out what we are. Whether we're dangerous. Whether we're useful. Whether we're going to be a problem. And I think," she paused, looking out one last time at the blue-white curve of Earth outside the viewport, "I think we're starting to show them the answer. Not with speeches. Not with treaties. Not with how many weapons we can carry or how many wars we can fight." She turned and looked at Eli. "We do what we do when nobody asks us to do anything. With what we reach for when something needs to be reached for. With who we are when the math says stay put and every instinct says go." Pause. "HFY," she said softly. "That's who we are. That's what we are. And the galaxy is still figuring out what to do with that." Eli looked at her for a moment. Then he straightened his jacket. "Captain," he said formally, "on behalf of the crew, it has been the greatest honor of my career." She met his eyes. "Likewise, Commander," she said. "Likewise." Somewhere across the galaxy, in the long, quiet halls of the Velhari High Council, a recording of the Kelvari Corridor ceasefire was being archived into the permanent historical record. The archivist, a young Velhari scholar barely 60 years old, read the entry tag carefully before filing it. Kelvari Corridor ceasefire, Year 6 of the Great War, facilitated by human vessel UES Abraham Lincoln, Captain, Sarah Cole. She paused. Then she added in the notes field her own personal annotation. First documented instance of human intervention in interstellar conflict. Outcome, ceasefire. Method unclear. The prevailing theory among analysts is that humans operated on a decision framework that does not correspond to any known strategic model. They helped because they could. They stayed because someone had to. They succeeded because they did not consider failure a premise. She paused. Then added one more line. Recommend updated threat assessment. Not because humans are dangerous, but because they are something far more difficult to plan for. She filed the record and went home. And in the Kelvari corridor, for the first time in 6 years, there was silence. It was not the silence of space, which was always there, cold, indifferent, and endless. A different kind of silence. The kind that comes after something terrible has stopped. The kind that, if you're very quiet and very still and very willing to hope, you can almost hear something growing in. Something that might, in time, become peace.